Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 2 of the 14th Macedonia 2025 Summits. Now let's begin our morning with a session focused on aligning national potential with smart and sustainable investment. Moderating the session is Viktor Mizo, Chair of the Macedonia 2025 Board of Directors and Managing Director at KOSTAL. Please join him in welcoming our distinguished panelists, and please don't forget to use Slido for questions for the panelists. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's like I'm starting both yesterday's and today's session. First of all, thanks for showing up in such a good number after last night's party. Hopefully not many of you are hangover, but if you are, we'll talk about investments. We'll wake you up. There won't be any ROI or discounted cash flow questions, so don't worry. But FDI, probably, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the most exploited topic over the last 14 summits, and certainly over the 18 years that Macedonia 2025 has been in existence. Because for a small country like Macedonia, and not only us, many countries around the world that are of similar small size, with open economies, attracting FDI seems to be one of the predetermined factors for economic development, growth, for bringing in knowledge and developing its own economy alongside with the foreign companies. So today we have a very interesting panel of 3 speakers with diverse backgrounds. But before I introduce the speakers, I want to just give you a couple of big picture situation about the global investment flows. FDI is a very competitive activity among nations and among cities and regions within countries, especially larger countries. The FDI flows over the last few years have been on the decline, and also there is transition in what type of FDI is taking place. Is it really about manufacturing? Is it about energy? Is it about services? Where the FDI flows coming from? Is it really about low taxes? Is it about low labor costs? Is it about capital-intensive versus labor-intensive type of investments? And where does a country like ours need to position itself going forward in order to be successful and to grow? And certainly, not only because of Trump's tariffs over the last 6 or so weeks, but the supply chains were under a lot of strain over the last 5-6 years, even pre-COVID with the chip crisis, and then during COVID, and then what happens in the Red Sea, and what happens in the Panama Canal, and many other things are really affecting trade and investment flows, and countries are competing against each other how to position themselves in this process. So let me introduce the panelists today. First, we have Jacopo Dettoni. He's the editor of FDI Intelligence, which is a unit of the Financial Times. And FDI Intelligence is the preeminent, not only publication, but organization that deals with all the information relevant to FDI around the world. Then we have Martin Kaspar, a returning speaker from last year. He did a really good job, so that's why we're inviting him again. And Martin is head of strategy and corporate development in a German Mittelstand company, but at the same time, he is a scholar and with a lot of knowledge about FDI, and he just recently was a co-editor of a book published about FDI called FDI in Cities. And finally, we have Ivica Jevtic, who is a senior partner of JPM and Partners, which is a regional law firm that deals with Macedonia, Serbia, and Montenegro. So he will be providing the legal aspect of FDI and how is FDI situated in the region, how are the countries honoring their contracts, obligations, and what is the situation about policy advocacy. So without further ado, let me start with Jacopo. Can you give us a little bit of big picture input? What is happening around the world? What are the investment flows like? And from an institutional standpoint, what are the important things that everybody should be aware about FDI?
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Viktor. Thanks, everyone, for being here at the first session. We actually were a bit concerned yesterday about opening up the day after the Prime Minister's speech and also after the party yesterday evening, but it looks like there is a lot of commitment around FDI, so we'll try to live up to expectations. Let me start, I think that to frame what I'm about to say as regards FDI, we can go back to the end of the Soviet Union, 1999. There was a moment in history when a prominent American sociologist framed the new era that was about to unfold as the end of history. To give the idea that, okay, now that the Cold War is over, there is just one hegemonic power left, and we are going to go towards this US power, the era of hyperglobalization, which actually materialized for at least 20 years, up until the early 2010s, more or less. We were actually living that idea that now we are all going towards this new world order characterized by less conflict, geopolitical hegemonic conflict, and globalization. Well, we can argue that over the last 5 years, the end of history is over, and now is the beginning of a new history. And also from an FDI perspective, we are really living through a deep paradigm shift. It's a very nuanced narrative, but I would give you 3 pillars that are determining this big paradigm shift. We discussed it at length also yesterday. Geopolitics is definitely upending anything in the global order nowadays, including obviously patterns of trade as well as foreign investment. I think that is meaningful to understand that FDI, the idea of FDI has really evolved. Up until a few years ago, FDI was a pretty neutral policy tool to trigger economic development, employment, and really for developing countries, lift the tide and lift the whole population through attracting foreign companies with their technology, their knowledge, their managers, their skills, and their capital, obviously. Nowadays, although that part of their role of FDI still plays a role, I think it's meaningful to go back to something that was explicitly mentioned in the America First policy by Donald Trump, where it stated that economic security is national security. So we can't really look at FDI in a vacuum anymore, but we have to look at FDI for investment through the lens of economic security. And this goes back, you mentioned Panama. Look what happened there. Like now, Panama has always been strategic for the United States, but now it's not just strategic, it's a matter of and it's not even a matter of regional security, it's a matter of national security. Therefore, we don't like Chinese investment along the Panama Canal anymore. Therefore, we are supporting, or we advocated for that takeover by BlackRock, which has not really materialized yet because it takes 2 to tangos, and it turned out that in this case, just one person was dancing, and the other part didn't ask his boss whether he can dance or not. But so economic security is national security, which means that FDI is now a tool of economic security, as well as still playing its traditional role of economic development, economic and social development. So this was one big disruption. The other two big disruptions are obviously sustainability and the kind of like the sustainability imperative. Renewable energy, investment into renewable energy has been one of the biggest single voices of foreign direct investment globally. We have seen like tremendous amount of capital flowing into wind power, solar power, and really across the sustainability and the green energy technologies. And so this is another element. And to some extent has totally replaced the role of oil and gas. Fossil fuels used to be the single biggest driver of foreign direct investment globally at the sector level, obviously because these are very capital-intensive sectors and they have been replaced by renewable energy. And finally, digitization. Obviously, digitization is very wide, very broad. Yesterday, we had a fascinating speech by the gentleman from Tether. From an FDI perspective, there are a couple of elements here. And particularly timely is the whole conversation around data centers. They really have become an incredible catalyst of investment, as well as including foreign investment across latitudes. And the level of capital pledges that we see going into data centers is really mind-blowing, and I personally doubt that all of that will materialize. But when you hear the $500 billion Stargate project in the US, France a few weeks afterwards announcing a $100 billion project in data centers in France. These are like very important figures, and even if just a fraction of that materializes, it still remains a transformative figure. It also creates a lot of problems from the perspective of the countries that are attracting FDI. They may be willing to attract data centers. This is very capital-intensive technology, which creates very few jobs. So how do you reconcile that with the idea of FDI as a way to, particularly from a developing country perspective, to create employment, development? It creates a lot of challenges, and there is a big trade-off. There is a new trade-off, and it doesn't relate exclusively to data centers. It goes into also automation, but data centers are definitely meaningful for this trend. So these three pillars, geopolitics, sustainability, digitization, I like to refer to them as a three-body problem. They are clear on their own, but the way they interact with each other leads to very unstable outcomes. Think, for example, of the European Union push for electric mobility. It's something that goes obviously in the direction of net zero and meeting net zero ambitions, but at least in its inception, apparently didn't really take into account a small detail that most of the batteries, they come from China. That is not necessarily our geopolitical ally any longer. Or think of the whole data center deployment and the whole artificial intelligence development, which is underpinned by data centers. Well, it turns out the data centers are incredibly energy hungry. Solar power and wind power are not likely the best way to meet all these energy needs, which is why there is a big push to develop small nuclear reactors. So in a way, we are going back to nuclear energy when we thought that the future was green energy, or in the non-conventional way of solar, wind, geothermic, etc. So it's the way these three factors play out together is unstable, and each country is trying to find their own way to play them together through the lens of economic security, national security, and FDI attraction. And I'm sure that there will be more coming from our fellow speakers, but I'll leave it to them.
Thank you, Jacopo. Thank you for setting the stage in what are the trends globally. Martin, from a corporate investor's perspective, what are the trends that you're seeing? What is important in terms of determining a location? What do you expect from an investment promotion agency or a national institution that tries to attract you as an investor? What type of activities features, potentially incentives, aftercare? What are you looking for?
Well, in terms of the situation we are in, clearly these are interesting times. I think there are three main aspects I would like to highlight. I mean, geopolitics was pretty much mentioned in every panel yesterday. I think you mentioned supply chains. Supply chains don't break down as they did in the past, but they just don't work quite as well anymore as they did in the past. They're not reliable, and you have cost fluctuations. And if you take these 2 points together, geopolitics and the difficulty with supply chains, companies increasingly start to wonder, well, is it actually a good idea to have products produced at the other end of the world, or shouldn't we produce closer to our key markets? And in terms of view of Macedonia 25, I think this is a really important message in the sense of, do you know where the most important companies in your country are actually having their key markets? Because that will have quite some implications in terms of trade flows and FDI flows. The second point is, and to me it's probably the most important one, is talent. The ability to get talent and skilled people, digitally native people, is incredibly difficult. And I know these guys are few and far between. So if you find them in sufficient numbers, even if they're slightly more expensive, you've hit the jackpot. Because that is really one of the points of scarcity. And in that sense, I would like to dispel a myth. Companies are not hunting for the lowest labor cost. What we're looking for is productivity, not low cost. Because if low cost would be the driver, we would all be sitting in South Sudan or in Afghanistan, but we're not. We're clearly here. So in that regard, if you discuss about foreign direct investment attraction, don't fetishize labor cost statistics. Think about it in terms of productivity. And that leads me to the third point, and that is ecosystems. I mean, these days you can probably build a plant pretty much anywhere in the world. But to be really successful, you need to be in an ecosystem. And the more high value, the more sophisticated your investment is, the more important an ecosystem becomes. Access to universities, to research institutes, service companies, talent again. Think about, are you that ecosystem that makes it attractive for companies to come here? And in a few minutes, I just very superficially talked about how companies look at the world. I think the far more interesting point is, and the question you asked, what do IPAs, what do governments have to do to really alleviate those concerns? In terms of talent, I say this is easy, and spend money on your people rather than on incentive packages. And I know we disagree on the importance of incentives, but bear with me. If IT, if digital, if big data is the big thing for you, let's be honest, it's a big thing for all of us. Pair up with the key companies in that field, with the Microsofts, with the IBMs, with the Siemens of the world. Have joint training campuses and pair up with the universities. Educate your people to a level that outshines all of your neighbors. And you might say, well, we don't know where the future is. I mean, yeah, that is true, but I think we know pretty well what skills we need to get into the future. It's AI, it's cybersecurity, it's advanced manufacturing. Make these free at the point of delivery for your people. And if you have to have incentive packages, and do it a bit like the Moroccans, they will reimburse every investor in the country for all the costs they're having for training, upskilling, anything to upgrading their human resources for 5, 7, 10 years, whatever. So you have an incentive package, and you spend the money on your people. In a way, I'm late to the party with that message, because I mean, on the opening speech, you talked about all the scholarships and all the things you do, and I mean, you're probably already best in class. I mean, this is a great initiative you're doing. I would just very much encourage you to double down and carry on, because I think that is the competitive advantage in this world. I mean, a world full of externalities, of external influences which you can't control, training is the one thing you can totally control yourself. And the second big thing, I said, and I mentioned in every speech yesterday, was geopolitics. The question is, can you do something against geopolitics? And I'd say yes, to a certain extent. I mean, have a geopolitical risk analysis center in your IPA, in your government. And if you don't have these guys, buy them in. And control risks, Eurasia Group, I don't know, find some professor in a university, God knows where. But get risk specialists into your organization. Because out there, the world is changing incredibly fast. I mean, every other day there is a new tariff, a new rule on, I don't know, local content or whatever. For companies, it's really, really hard to keep up with that. If you have somebody who sort of sends out analyses, briefing notes, warnings, oh guys, this is happening, this is a real, genuine value for companies. Help companies sort of to navigate the trade wars. I mean, help yourself as a nation to navigate the trade war. And it's probably the first time ever that the interests of the nation and the interests of the corporates are perfectly aligned. We all need to get through this somehow. In practical terms, sort of map all the flows of investment into your country from the various countries where they're coming from and out of it at the level of the HS code, sort of the level at which tariff is applied. Because only then you can really calculate the risk you are incurring, sort of where it's coming from, the volume, and the tariff. And if you do that for you as a nation, you can do that for the corporates as well. And just imagine, you go out to a corporate and say, God, by the way, guys, you are under risk in that protect category to that volume. That really helps. Sort of get customs law specialists in, sort of the practical things. And to your last point, I mean, what are IPAs supposed to be doing? I'm a strong believer IPAs should not be glorified marketing agencies. IPAs should be practical in terms of helping corporates operate in the country. And one of the most important things in my mind is aftercare. I mean, sort of, it's super important, rarely done properly. It is being continuous in what you're doing. I mean, look at the Irish. For the last 60, 70 years, they sort of plow on. Irrespective of what government is in power, irrespective of what party is in power, they continue to do what they need to do. That is what actually really helps companies operate in FDI.
Thank you, Martin. Ivica, the legal and the institutional environment, the region and in Macedonia, how do you view this? What are the regulatory reforms that the investors that you are working with are looking for to be improved by the countries in this region? And are the governments listening to the voice of the existing investors?
Yeah, thank you, Viktor. Well, let's start at the legal framework, which the regional countries has, is more or less the same. We're coming from the same system, so and even in attracting the FDIs, we have the same laws that are attracting these investments. I mean, we're generally aligned. All these countries are aligned. They have the same, more or less, tax benefits. They have more or less same incentives for workers for opening a workplace, for permits, lands, licensing, things like that. So in this environment, you cannot compete anymore with lower taxes because everybody have like from 9 to 15%. So you cannot get lower probably, and we'll probably see the reverse process in the future in increasing especially the profit tax. What we can see is that the laws are there, but the implementation gap is also there. Because it's one thing to have that law on paper, the other thing is to implement them. So what we are facing is that we need to improve our administration, our bureaucracy, so we can, what we have said and what we had promised to these investors to implement, to implement. So in that cases, so we believe that we should try, and it was on the yesterday's panels, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Poland said that the rule of law, although is a topic that everybody speaks about that, but it's something that we need to take care of very seriously, very seriously. For example, Macedonia doesn't have a specialized course for commercial disputes. We have separate department in the civil court in Skopje, but what's the problem? Because it's a department, the judges often change, and you can get in case when the third or fourth judge which will take your case will rule on that case. That, for investor, is not a good sign that case will take care of properly. Another case, for example, your company is in Ohrid. Ohrid is a small town. So you have a small court over there. If you get in some commercial dispute over there, you'll probably end up with a judge who maybe is a nice judge, I mean, experienced judge, but who probably get taking care of divorces or disputes about the fence between neighbors, and that will take care of your case, which is maybe in the millions. So that doesn't get any faith in the investors who are coming and want to invest. So we should probably get some specialized commercial dispute court. We're a very small country. We're an hour and a half from north to south, from west to east. So getting one specialized court for commercial disputes where we will teach these judges will give more faith to the investors who are coming here. Let me say that this problem has all other countries. Serbia has this problem, Montenegro has this problem, Bosnia has this problem. So it's not like we are the only one who have these problems. But if we want to attract more FDIs, we want to be the first one who will resolve these issues. The second topic is what we can see, and as Martin said, the aftercare. I mean, we have systems where in the free zones, and I can say for a positive aspect, it's going very well. You have a one-stop shop system where you can get all your incentives, or you can get all permits, licensing, things like that, to start the business. But let's not forget, most of the businesses are not, FDIs are not coming to the free economic zones, they're coming also out of the zones. So, and I feel that they're left alone. The IPAs in Macedonia don't have the legal power to do the aftercare or to give them some care during the process of investing in this country. So we need to make a legal framework where you will have a dedicated IPA who will help you go through the process, and after that, who will help you to solve all your problems which we have in everyday work. So in that case, I believe that the aftercare is very important. I believe that having the predictability in the laws is also very important. For example, we have two cases of, because nobody's vesting, let's say, nobody's vesting for 2 years. If they're building a factory, they want to stay longer. So when we speak with investors, they never say, I mean, the incentives are important, all the benefits are important, but the most important thing is, would those incentives, those benefits, those taxes, regulation will be there in place in 5 or 10 years. And that's more than one government. So we need to make sure that more governments will stay on the course, especially in the tax regulation. For example, we have the tax on solidarity a few years back, which was, I don't say, if there are pros and cons in that law. I'm not saying is it a good or a bad law. But we have adopted that law the following year, and it was for the previous year. So all these companies which need to pay these taxes have already paid their profit tax, they already distribute their dividend to the shareholders, and need to find money in the following year for the previous year. That gives uncertainty to the investors. That gives uncertainty to the potential investors who are coming to this country. So, and that can be easily avoided. give predictability, give locatio legis 1 year, 2 year, speak with investors, speak with the community and say, okay, we were going to do this. The companies will adapt to that. But first of all, you need a predictability and not to change in a rush all these laws. Now we have the same example with a minimal corporate tax, which was also adopted like 2 years before the new year, and it is going to get effect on the next year when probably all the budgets, and you know better than me, of these companies have been locked. So this company need to find those funds, and that gives uncertainty to the investors and sends a bad message, and which can be easily avoided if we have a predictability and we tell and speak with them and give them the proper message, what we're going to do and how will that affect their businesses.
Thank you. Can you please put the first question on slide while we're speaking? So please answer this question. We'll go to that in a few minutes. But Jacopo, a couple of the things that were mentioned. First of all, the global minimum corporate tax that has been implemented since last year. That means tax holidays for large multinationals are off the table. What does that mean? Not just for us. For many places around the world, free zones had tax holidays. What does that mean? How do you change? It's not only about incentives, but when it was special new environment that was created before coming this location because we have something more favorable, how is that changing the whole landscape of FDI attraction?
Okay, the question is it going to be implemented? That still remains to be seen because the Trump administration signed on the first day of the new presidency an executive order saying that they will not implement and they will go after the companies that implement it against the United States, US MNEs. So I think that we are looking at a situation where the European Union that spent a lot of capital both on an OECD level and then when trying to convince Hungary to sign up for the global minimum tax, to implement the global minimum tax, risk remaining isolated in a global context where the two largest economies in the world are not implementing it. And so we may be facing a situation where European MNEs are asked to comply with something that would go to the detriment of their competitiveness because then US MNEs or other MNEs don't have to comply with a 15% global minimum tax in their subsidiaries. So this, I was a firm believer that this could have been done, and there was a strong consensus. Also, the Biden administration kind of hinted, almost managed to get it through Congress. This has not happened. So this adds to the uncertainty, and I think that this probably goes a bit farther from your question, but this is the biggest risk that we are envisioning now when we talk about the end of multilateral regime and the possible damage that this U.S. administration, to be blunt, is doing across the world, is that losing that leadership role in multilateral platforms. The global minimum tax was a reform that took 10 years to be agreed and was agreed with very strong consensus at the OECD level with very, very few holdouts, Kenya and Nigeria. So it was really a success of multilateralism, and it got just basically flushed out in a stroke of a pen by this new development. So it's uncertain, provided that it happens. It also goes back to what Martin said, like companies not necessarily look for cheap labor, or is not necessarily the top of their priorities. If you look at surveys, it's not fiscal holidays, not necessarily top of their preference in terms of like their decision making. Then obviously, I think that those surveys they tend to underplay. It's nice for a corporate executive to say, no, we're not really looking for fiscal incentives, but more of talent. But then obviously, fiscal incentive, multi-balance, tilt the needle, and the Balkan region. was also taken as an example of the so-called race to the bottom, right? Was one of the business cases of this is what happens if we don't set a threshold. All the countries or neighboring countries are racing to lower their taxation, which ultimately is going to hinder their fiscal capacity to do public investment, to invest in talent. Is it really worth the trade-off if you go that low? So I think that it was on paper, it's a great chance for free zones and then in geography at large really to sharpen their investment proposition, talent. I think that it's probably, and also yesterday there were presentations emphasizing the role of STEM talent. There was also polls that mentioned the role of Macedonia 2025 in taking on that leadership and the training and upscaling role. And talent is not just, I think, a cliche to say nowadays. I think that one of the interesting things of this digital disruption is its asymmetrical impact, meaning that in military terms, it's easy to understand. Like, you don't need 10 tankers anymore to fight 10 tankers. And the Russians, they got to understand this on their own skin, because the Ukrainians, particularly at the beginning, with drones and a few other advanced technology military tools, they managed to withstand that type of invasion that we saw in the very early day of the Ukrainian war. And this is because the new technologies are very asymmetrical in their impact. And this also plays out at a bigger level. You don't need to be a big economy, a big country any longer to have an impact in a global economy. You can see Taiwan has played it very, very cannily. Taiwan was not a big economy, and now it's probably the single biggest, most important node in the global supply chains. Without Taiwan, this is why it's so strategic, and this is why they played it so well, because now the US has got probably the second largest strategic interest outside national security, domestic security, is to make sure that Taiwan remains somewhat, not in the Communist Party hands, because of until the production of microchips is mostly located there. And so, how do you unlock that strategic role? How do you unlock the power of asymmetric technologies? Is through talent. And I would also argue, going back to incentives, I think that the days of free market thinking, or 100% free market thinking, the Chicago Boys days are pretty much over. We can acknowledge that public investment matters. Taiwan didn't become TSMC, didn't become TSMC because they became very efficient and very competitive overnight. It was a massive public investment industrial policy, the result of massive public investment industrial policy. And also the Biden administration, the Trump administration, they're doing nothing new in terms of their industrial policies. This is how any country developing has always protected their fledgling nascent industries. So even for developing countries, when you find your niche, when you find your competitive edge, protect it, invest it also to public investment. I think that this should be part of the equation, should not be underplayed, we should not be too carried away any longer with the idea of the investors are going to come and there will be a ripple effect, they're going to create employment, they're going to transfer technology, knowledge. The reality is that if you are a cutting-edge technology company, you don't want to transfer technology. You just want to come, produce efficiently, and make profits along the way. But you definitely, you know that your IP is your single most valuable assets in this context. So talent, some public investment, and also play hardball. When attracting FDI, don't be naive any longer. Technology transfer, yesterday somebody mentioned joint ventures. I think that we are in the European Union is doing it, the Americans are doing it. There is no reason why other countries should not be playing hardball anymore. Obviously, it's a competitive issue. So, if I play hardball, then somebody else next door comes and is a bit more loose and gets the investment. Maybe, but if you don't do that, you don't make the most of that investment.
Thank you. Can you please put the answers of the first question? And while I'll ask you to comment on that, what is your opinion? But first, you mentioned Ireland, Singapore, Costa Rica, all small countries. 50, 60 years ago, they were really underdeveloped. And they are now on the top of the world in their respective regions, not only because of the investment they attracted, but also because of the continuity, the national strategy. What would you recommend were the positive features of those three locations and other small countries like Macedonia that should be implemented in order to be successful in this journey on economic development and FDI attraction?
Difficult in the sense of we're talking about a time span of 50 years and the rules of the games have changed quite significantly. But I think the characteristic of all three countries is that they had excellent IPAs. And excellent IPAs, I think, are a function of how much support they're giving and how continuous they are. Sort of if you have a policy continuity, and we sort of had that from all speakers in a way, promises being made are promises being kept. Directions aren't changing if there is a new government in place and sort of new things are done. Because it takes quite some time to filter out into the market who you are as a country. I mean, this is a crowded field, as it were. And sort of, if there is one thing we're all suffering from, it's information overload. So to get the message through is quite difficult, and to have a consistent message, I think, is very important. Banging on again about aftercare, I can sort of answer that as a corporate and as an academic. As a corporate, I've built 11 production plants around the world. In only one country, we've been recontacted by the IPA later on. I think that tells you about the level of aftercare there really is out there in the market. And that's all more surprising that by UN statistics, we know that in advanced economies where you have a big stock of FDI, up to 60% of the FDI flows are actually coming from existing investors. In developing countries where you don't have this big stock, it's between 30 and 40%. But I mean, the message is the bigger flow of investment is actually coming from guys you already know. So don't spend all the money on hunting the guys you don't know. Make it as easy, as comfortable, and as helpful to those who are already there, because it's likely that they're going to expand. And I think that the key point, and every business person in the room will know exactly what I'm talking about. Business is very rarely or never about the product. Business is always about the people. If you have the right people in your IPA, if they know what they're talking about, if they're business-minded, if they speak the language, I think this is invaluable. And that's how you sort of do it.
Can you comment a little bit, any of you? Interestingly enough, agriculture and green energy are on top. Green energy is something that is a new trend on the last, let's say, handful of years here. Certainly agriculture was not a big investment for Macedonia, but automotive industry, which has the largest potential stock of investment and largest portion of the export, is not there. Please, Jacopo, go ahead before you guys comment.
I will. I wanted in 2 minutes just like also to go back to your small country reference question. I've lived in and worked in different countries around Asia, Europe, and South America. I've heard the story of we want to be the new Singapore multiple times. Most famously also in the UK, where one of the selling point of the Brexit referendum was we can be free and trade to the whole world and become the new Singapore. Well, it turns out that, as very well said by Jeremy Hunt, the former business minister. We wanted to be the new Singapore on Thames. We became the new Argentina on the channel. You know, no offense given to Argentina, but there is no chance that countries around the world can replicate what Singapore did, and particularly democracy around the world. Let's also be frank, like Singapore has got a very top-down governance that if you want to be a democracy, you can't really look up to Singapore. At the same time, there are many, you mentioned a few, incredible cases of small countries being able to punch above the weight. You mentioned Ireland. You mentioned, yesterday probably there was mentioned Estonia is a great country. Costa Rica is a fantastic example of a country that leveraged talent, institutional stability. Costa Rica is a country that in the constitution in 1946 or 48, they abolished the army. They abolished their military and basically they outsourced security. But one of the reasons was well, first of all, probably even if we have an army, we are pretty much powerless. And secondly, we want to use the money to develop our talent. And look at them. They are one of the biggest nearshoring platforms after Mexico in Central America. So there are a lot of examples out there. I think that for developing countries, it's very important to anchor their expectations in a realistic and feasible way. And yeah, on green energy, I was actually talking for as much as they tell me, I'm not an expert, but they tell me that the wind power potential in the Balkan region is outstanding. And this is another very interesting element of the green energy revolution, if you may. Up until this point, capital has been allocated if you may, very inefficiently, almost inefficiently, because capital has chased a lot of public incentives, a lot of like, imagine that we did a story a couple of years ago. In the UK, up until, this is 2019 data, so probably things are a bit slightly different now, but there was more solar, there was 4 times as much solar capacity installed than the whole of Africa. In the UK, and I live in London, I tell you that I long for sunny days every day. I wake up and I say, like, when the sun is going to come out. And there was 4 times more solar power capacity installed than the whole of the African continent that we can all agree that doesn't lack solar irrigation. So I think that to unlock the potential of renewable energy is not a matter of resources or like potential. It's a matter of institutional framework. Do you have a good regulation? Do you have a regulation that investors can trust over the lifetime of a project, which is 15 to 20 years or even more? Do you have capital? So I think that it's more about, like if you think of oil and gas, it's a whole different game. Oil and gas, either you have fossil oil and gas or you don't. Wind and solar are pretty evenly distributed. There are countries with more or less, but in the Balkans, they tell me wind power is excellent. And there is still a big premium paid to investors that take the plunge in countries where all the pieces are falling into place. And I think that the latest development in wind power energy here in Macedonia, they seem to suggest that the pieces are falling into place in Macedonia too, so it's a great potential.
Thank you. Can you put the second question, please? Ivica, I have a question for you. You mentioned about the inefficiency or maybe the lack of capability of local court systems in terms of resolution of potential disputes between government institutions and foreign investors. What is the alternative? Would an alternative be international arbitration? Would you advise your clients to go in a direct dispute with the government or government institutions, or will you try to find a more amicable solution which is more conducive for both sides? Because if you go to the court system, no matter what the outcome is, then there may be a divorce between the investor and the government.
Yeah. Well, let me start from back. Like, so we don't go to court, and we don't, the investors don't lose a lot of time in getting the licenses, the permits, and things like that. We need a lot of digitalization. So we extract the humans in deciding, or getting those processes so long. So in that case, I think we can help and reduce maybe the disputes between the investors and the government or some other entities. Second of course, amicable resolution of all disputes is always the best scenario, because we believe, and it's the best case scenario, so everybody can go on and do with their business. Third aspect is that, of course, arbitration is the last stand, and it usually involves in every contract between the governments and the FDIs. So that's a standard procedure, that everybody has that. So if you wanted to invest 10, 20, 50, 100 million, of course you will not let the local courts to decide on this matter. And that's not only in Macedonia, it's all over the world. So in that case, I don't think that's a big difference between how the things are done in UK or France or Germany or or here in the Macedonia or Serbia or Montenegro or all this region. What I can say is that we need more accountability from the public administration. In this country, we have the problem is that if we don't know how to decide something, we say, okay, we will leave it here, go to court, sue. If you get the verdict, then we will implement this decision. And that's the worst case scenario. We need to take accountability for our actions, and especially the administration. Like, you cannot do that. You cannot, because in this case, you're losing a lot of money. You lose a lot of patience. And in the end, the government is the one that suffers, because nobody's taking into consideration all the legal costs, all the fees, all the interest that needs to be paid in the end. So we need to work, and I can see this problem in the region. It's not only in Macedonia, to be fair, but we need to take more accountability from the public administration when they make decisions. The easiest way is to say, okay, I will reject you and go to court. But that's not how you treat private investors. That's not how you treat FDIs. That's not how you develop your country. So in that case, maybe that's the biggest issue with the need to attract, and that is the accountability of the public administration.
Now a question for everyone. This is what the audience thinks, where should Macedonia attract investments from? So European Union, as expected, is on top. But interesting enough, Gulf states and China are even ahead of the Americans and Japan and South Korea. So with the global investment screening process, especially the one that has been existing in the US for more than 50 years, and the European Union is implementing this certainly over the last few years based on geopolitics, etc. What would be first your opinion about Chinese investments? Is that a good or a bad investment, and why?
Putting me on the spot here. I don't think that there is we should not being dogmatic in saying there is good and bad investment. Ultimately, it's Macedonia that decides what is good for the country and what is not. To some extent, European Union, but you have to play also. You have to make the most of the benefit. You are not in the European Union yet, so you can still decide totally independently on that. I think that. The European Union itself is not being very dogmatic about Chinese investment. It's raising the challenge, it's raising the risks, and then it's creating barriers to some Chinese investment in strategic sectors. But we were talking right yesterday, 2 years ago, Chinese invested in the port of Hamburg. It's not even 10 years ago, it's like 2 years ago. So it's still feasible for Chinese investment to flow into the European Union. I think that it's very important to, and this goes back to talent and strong institutions, strong rule of law underpinned by human capital. Set the rules right. You have concerns about intellectual property, design a strict intellectual property or like a good intellectual property regulation. You have concerns about asset stripping. design good asset stripping regulation. You have concerns about, you want to retain some level of control, counts what may, design a good regulation, a golden share or golden pill, whatever you want to call it, give your government a chance to call back or call in the deal and decide on a political level rather than just leaving it to market forces. So I think that it's, obviously for a country like the United States, the race for global supremacy with China is what is and will define anything moving forward. Not necessarily for the European Union, for a country like Macedonia. So if you think that there could be elements of Chinese investment that can play into the hands of the national development strategy, do it, but make sure that the risks are limited. And also very interesting to see about Gulf states. I think that the so-called middle powers, not just Gulf states, but also Turkey, Indonesia, so those countries that are trying to, Brazil, remain somewhat non-aligned or trying to play different geopolitical blocks to their own strengths, they are becoming a big and growing source of global capital. And more countries are trying to attract, obviously Gulf states are a bit of a no-brainer because of they always hit the headlines, but look at for Turkish companies, Brazilian companies, Indian companies. These are new sources of capital, very important actors of globalization moving forward, and possible very important sources of capital for developing countries.
Martin, a few words on this before I summarize.
Very briefly, in as much as time's nearly up. The sector I found really surprising. Agriculture, relatively low value generation. Green energy, nearly zero jobs in there. It's sort of wealth is aggregating at the holders of capital. It's not spreading, as we heard yesterday, throughout the society. I mean, manufacturing jobs are far more spreading out jobs throughout the entire country. And despite the fact that yesterday we talked all day long about the importance of IT, it made the last spot. I found that really remarkable. In terms of the destinations, a difficult one, in as much as your FDI depends to 80% of the European Union, and a more FDI from the European Union sort of, aggregates the lump risk in one corner. On the other hand, the Europeans probably are going to close the door to Chinese trade, not to be flooded by Chinese goods. The only way for the Chinese to circumvent that is invest in the European Union. If you're betting on China, I'm not entirely sure if that is the safest way to go strategically.
Thank you. Ivica, 30 seconds.
Yes. EU is our biggest trader, biggest partner, biggest importer of FDIs. But for example, Serbia, where we also operate, attracts a lot of Chinese investments, and Serbia is also EU candidate, and also attracts a lot of investments from United States and from EU. So that means that they don't have problems with this. So I believe naturally it's the best case scenario if you attract investments from European Union and United States, but if they are slowing up, somebody needs to fill that gap. And I believe we should think about that, and if we're going to attract investments for China, or as Jacopo said, maybe from another emerging markets like Brazil, South America and India and things like that. But we should not reject that idea because it's functioning in our neighbor country. So we should think and see what's the potential over there.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the speakers. And the debate may be still ongoing, so I encourage any of you over the next, during the day to reach out to any of the speakers if you have additional questions on FDI. Thank you very much.